Yes, Andrea, how are you?
Hi, Vikram. How are you? Happy
Good.
Friday.
Thank you very much. I said by the time you come in, I was actually going to go through March like I always do. So
I
when
do what I clicked in about 10 minutes ago or so, so I don't know what the delay was in coming
delay was,
through.
I didn't start the meeting. I'm and now I'm
Oh,
like
okay.
I'm on time now. Even 1 minute before, if you come in, is perfectly all right. So not an
That's
issue.
okay.
But what I do is, Andrea, let me just go through this March and April thing. Yep. You
Yeah,
okay with
go
that?
ahead.
So at least so that at least it doesn't take in time later. So let's just go through that. And of course, you are also going to tell me if you've seen any of these. And I do tell people, I keep repeating this. Mediator experiences is about mediators telling us about their memorable experiences. It is good right now. Weinstein Jams International Fellows, and that will happen for some time. Then Heart, Soul, and Spirituality as part of Mediation Vision 2026. Various points are out at mediatorvikram.com. If you want to discuss any of them, just let me know. So this was Gabriela has come, of course, and various other things. Very interesting having conversations with her.
Yes,
Have you?
fascinating.
Yeah. So this obviously you were part of International Women's Day. So that is what it was. It was interesting.
Yeah, there was a lot of us.
Okay, so this basically is a follow-up from that. There, obviously, Andrea did not get time to talk. So now a little more elaborate because there's lots to talk about. I mean, I don't know whether you saw Sarah's session. Did you see that? Sarah Blake from Australia.
No.
Okay.
Sarah Blake, I did. I actually watched it yesterday.
Okay. So we just continue. The only thing is that you're not supposed to take from there. Your own original ideas have to come in your original. You're not taking anything
No, I was
from there.
actually yeah, I was fascinated because I'd heard her speak on this International Day. So it was interesting because I know she was saying that her father was a mediator as well. So it was just, I suppose that's what flagged my interest.
I know it's interesting. And that many years back, someone being a mediator. And then we did part of that again. And another topic is mediators, mediation, and global problem solving. So in the background of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Of course, this also needs more discussion. I mean, we'll have more discussions on this. And online mediation. Alberta's doing interesting work in Latin America. So, and I don't know
I
whether you
haven't
got
actually
time to.
watched it.
Did you?
No, I haven't watched that yet, but I will try and squeeze it in.
No, just the fact that I think about 20 years back, he was talking about it. So at least, I mean, 10, 12 years back, he started doing things there. So interesting. See what all work he's done, because why reinvent the wheel? He's gone through so much. So let's look at that. Then, of course, Socrates and mediation. I don't know whether you saw this interesting
I did.
session.
Yeah, I did. And I saw poor Gabriella was going off for a flight or going off to travel somewhere.
Yeah. The things that because all these shows go on for so much time, people do have to take flights also. And then Begim from Kyrgyzstan. Interestingly, I don't know whether of course, whether you would have got time to see it, but in Kyrgyzstan, Indian Hindi, what we call Bollywood, the Hindi film industry, that music was what she was listening to when she was growing up. Can you imagine? In Kyrgyzstan. So that's what our film industry does. At least it takes us to places people are familiar with, actors and songs. So very interesting. After the session, we were actually listening to songs. But what happens is that with YouTube, you can't play something there because it becomes a copyright issue kind of thing. So after that, we were listening to a few songs, and then she told me about some Kyrgyz songs. So I mean, and then she played a Kyrgyz song. I said, "This sounds like another song that we listened to." I sent her that link. So that was interesting. And then, of course, women and mediation, Sarah Blake. So this part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll have discussions on various aspects of this. Then Mahatma Gandhi and mediation. Whether you saw this, I don't know. We have
No, I haven't
two.
seen that. No, I haven't seen that yet.
We have. I think we have one person missing. Lisa's not in this one because she came in later. There's another poster. This one we have to get to know. I don't know whether you know her. I think.
No, never. Don't know a thing about her. But it'll be interesting to see what she has to say.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to get to know her. And then Bunny Bear on Saturday tomorrow. And then this I have someone who's experienced. I was a mediator in a matter, and I said, because I do high value corporate matters, so commercial matters. So let him talk about it. From the user experience perspective, I think that is what is important. I can keep talking about mediation and how it's good for you, but let's have someone who's experienced it, large company. So let's do that. So that I'm doing, but I mean, it won't be live, but I will record it. Let's see if I can I post it or not. I'll decide later. And then, of course, Jerry, So
Yeah.
the only thing is we have to call people for the workshop, Andrea. Have you called some people?
For which?
She said she wants do a little workshop kind of thing. So have you called some people?
Yeah, don't be worried, but we'll get it sorted.
Yeah, because
it's all in the pipeline. It's all in the pipeline.
Well, let's tell Michael also. Let's call him also.
Mm.
We'll check with him if he's available.
No, I think he's done this already with Jerry.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we have the celebrating mediators. If you have your birthdays, let me know. Attend the party. And then
no, I keep them hidden at Vikram.
So April, call for speakers. Put out if you. I mean, Andrea, have you fixed a session for your session on this? You haven't, I think.
No, for sure. Everybody be sick listening to me, Vikram.
They will. You have to be part of this. After we finish, I'll fix a time for you. You have to be part of this symposium. And but it won't be as big as the last one. I mean, I can't do that much again. It was 2 months of my life just gone like that. Okay, so Rosanna, very interesting person from Kazakhstan. So that she comes in. And then Gabriela is now actually going to take us. She did take us through that systemic constellation in her discussions, but she actually wants to do one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So what she said, look, it can be what family constellations, but it can also be countries. So what I'm doing is I'm calling some mediators from Russia and Ukraine. Let us see how that goes. So that's the attempt on this one.
So what exactly does it entail, Vikram?
Basically she's explained the theory part of it. Then what I did was I looked for a video that it's used in Brazilian courts. So I saw a video on that. So basically there is a person, basically there is a issue that they have, and then they call people who are sitting in the court, and someone represents someone in the family, the other person represents someone else, and then they talk about how you're feeling, and they talk about it, and this person is sitting on the side seeing what's happening around him, and maybe look, a different perspective comes in there. So that's how it works. It's interesting. I mean,
it's like a group. It's like a group talk. It's like a group discussion.
Yeah. It's like not even a discussion. Actually, people just relating their experience by not being themselves part of that dispute, but being external people. Yeah.
There's actually an article, I think it was wrote in the 1970s by a guy called Niels Christie, and it's about the ownership of conflict and how, that going through, say, lawyers and courts and things like that, that we hand over the ownership of our conflict, that it's no longer ours, and that we lose something in that process. We lose the learning, we lose the sense of acknowledgement, the sense of somebody taking accountability for what they do. But in the article, he gives a description of a small remote village. I can't remember where it is now. I'd have to pull the article out again. And in that, everybody that is part of the dispute, so anybody that's in the surrounding village, who is a neighbor, who is a friend, everybody comes in to help actually solve the dispute. So that actually sounds very similar to that. So it's just interesting.
Yeah, because they may be getting other people's perspective changes your own concept of how you're looking at it, because now you are a spectator. No, you are not the one in the middle of everything. So interesting. So let's see how that goes. It won't be live. I put that live thing. It won't be. It will not be live. It will not be live. We'll record it and then see how it goes. And Danny Weinstein comes back on part 3. And then what do we have after that? Do we have something after that? Okay, so in the symposium, Ken Cloak is the keynote speaker, but his keynote is on 14th April. The symposium will start from the 6th. Yeah, I think from the 6th. So on the first Wednesday of April. So he comes in a little later, but that's how it is. And of course, then we'll have sessions of the symposium, and then whatever else happens, we'll put it out there. So, Andrea, thank you very much for coming in. It's always a pleasure speaking to you. And you are going to now just talk about yourself first, because it's important. I was telling Sarah also, just talk about background, history, everything, because we have to see where you're coming from when you bring in the women and mediation. So today we're talking about women and mediation, but all that experience of life and everything also is important when you talk about it. So please.
Yeah, do you know, I was actually thinking about this last night, Vikram, and I was thinking about what's part of my life is important in around not only mediation, but around diversity and everything else of that. So just to give, I suppose, a bit of background on my childhood as such, without going into too much detail, but I grew up in a household where my dad had multiple sclerosis. So he was incapacitated from a very early age. He was only they were married. My mum and dad were married very young. They were only 20, but by the time he was 21, he was diagnosed. Well, he wasn't diagnosed, but he starts showing signs of multiple sclerosis. So I suppose most of my childhood was about, was in around disabilities, sickness, being treated differently, and things like that. Now, I don't want to go down. I don't have any hang-ups about it. Actually, to me, it was a gift because it made me the person kind of more open and understanding and caring person. So I actually look back on it now as a gift. But I remember as a child feeling different because when we went to, say, any school events or, if you'd have a big kind of, say, so I come from, as most people now do, I come from a Catholic background. So you would have had communion and confirmations. And when my dad had come to the church with me, he was in a wheelchair. And you'd be worried about what your friends saw and how you would be treated differently because your parent was different to their parent, and especially during teenage years and things like that. So I suppose in that regard, I was always very conscious of how I judged people, how I seen people. I remember, because my dad was in a wheelchair and was disabled in some way, physically disabled, people often shouted at him. So they'd say, his name was Tommy, and they'd say, Tommy, and he was perfectly, he high IQ and everything else. But because he had a physical disability, people had an unconscious bias that they needed to talk to him in a certain way and break things down in a certain way. And I suppose it was something that used to infuriate me, as a child, looking on at this man that I thought was my hero and was so intelligent and everything else. So I suppose as regards diversity, I would have strong feelings about people being included regardless of how they're presented, regardless of their background, regardless of their ability, regardless. So in other words, I suppose that people are people. They're not their packaging. They're not their gender. They're not their religious belief. They're not that. They're much more than, they're much more. They're people, which is so much more than our gender and everything else. I think all that is just the packaging that we come to, but the core of who we are is the person. So that's probably a bit deep, but just to give you an idea of my
we're going to go deeper on that. We'll still go deeper on that, but after you finish, we will go into that. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
And so I grew up in a family. I've 4 siblings, so there was 5 of us, and I had a mother who worked very hard because there was times my dad couldn't work, and so it was all about us being together, like helping, and I suppose everybody had a role, everybody had a job. Now I will say, interesting enough, it was going back in the 70s, so the role was that maybe my brother cut the grass and cleaned out the fire grate, where I maybe might cook the dinners and clean the floors, so there was that division of male and female jobs, but there was no less or more respect for one job over the other, if that makes sense. Like, it was part of a team. So the best way to break up for the team to work together was to give people the jobs that maybe they were better at. Now, I would say my brother's a better cook than I am, and we would equally be as good at looking after children. So, because that was very much part of us, everybody was hands-on. So I suppose I brought that came into me in my adult life. And then I've various different careers over my lifetime. I worked for a trade union for a number of years. And then I went from a trade union into the area of accountancy. And then from that, I went into recruitment and consultancy in that area. And then when my children were young, I decided, that and see, this is the difference when we talk about women in the workplace and things like this. This was my decision that was the best one for me, was to stay at home but work part-time. And I worked part-time with my own business. I set up my own business and worked part-time, and it allowed me to do the stuff, but that was my own personal decision. And so that's what was right for me and felt right for me. And then I suppose I came into mediation because my children were getting older, and I wanted a different area, I suppose, to look at, and I wanted something more. And when I went into kind of, I suppose, study mediation as such, as opposed to actually, I'd probably been mediating my whole life, but to actually study mediation, what I found was that everything I had experienced in life was wrapped up in mediation. So for me, what we learn, say, when we go training courses, or we do a degree, or we do a master's in mediation, wherever else, we're learning about the process, we're learning the tools, we're learning about I suppose, all the things that make mediation work. But one of the core things is that people are people. So it's the human understanding. And I think sometimes, with mediation, it's all that experience, because we have the divide between, lawyers who are mediators and then non-lawyer mediators. And sometimes it's that little bit of a rift between that. And I think, the value, they all bring a certain value with them. And I think, but we need to recognize the value that somebody's coming with a life's worth of experience in different environments, in a family environment, in a community environment, in a workplace environment, dealing with, from kids to partners to whatever it is. That brings a sense of human understanding that no university can teach you. But when we mix that together with what the universities can teach us and everything else, then it is a powerful tool. But we always have to have the same, a bit like I was talking about my brother and myself, we different jobs, but there was the same level of respect given for each job, because that level of respect meant the team worked. And I think that's why it is that in mediation, you'll often find, I was looking at actually a piece of research by Heidi, what was her name? Heidi, I think it was, it'll come to me, I think it was Riley or something like that. But she did a piece of research on women in mediation in Ireland and peacekeeping. And what she found, that only 4% of the women were on the top table of negotiation for mediation, and the rest of them were down in the grassroots. And it was to, that level of mediation at the grassroots is just as important as the ones that are on the top table making the final decisions. Because if we don't bring the grassroots up with us, you have to take a bottom-up approach as well as a top-down approach. If we don't bring the bottom up with us, well, then those people at the top table won't have the support they need. So it's important that that level of respect is given to, and level of importance is given to the people that were working in the grassroots, which now this research has shown is actually mainly women in that environment. So I suppose it's important to make sure that, for me, gender, there is a difference in gender. I have 2 daughters. I would like to know that they have equal opportunities when they go out in the workforce, but I would also like them to have the belief in themselves that they're entitled to that, but they work, when the entitlement comes from work and respect and everything else. And just like for men, now, the environment doesn't always allow for that, because we've built up a culture and a society where over generations, over centuries, there has been an imbalance between men and women. I don't think we can change that overnight. And I think it has to be a top-down and bottom-up approach. So it has to come from 2 directions. So it's we talk about women in mediation, but the women that are coming in through mediation and the males that are coming through mediation, the people that will make a difference to those mediators are the households they're brought up in, the schools they're brought up in, the communities they're part of. And that's where we make the difference. Now, again, as I said, it's a 2-way approach. It's a bottom up and a top down. So there's policies, decisions that have to be changed and things like that. But but I do think it's at the end of the day, people are people,
Exactly.
so
Exactly. I
it's
mean,
working with that.
yeah, exactly. That, I mean, the outer wrapping that we are in, I mean, it's nothing. I think getting down into the person is where, in any case, everything that you do, I mean, work-wise or relationships or everything, you have to reach out to that person inside. And but when it comes to disability, I just have to understand, is it lack of knowledge or is lack of sensitivity when people behave like the way you were saying? Where do we have to start? I mean, you have to start educating them in school. How do we do that? Because it's like physical disabilities, mental health issues, all those things. I think there's very major lack of understanding, or is it just being insensitive?
No, I don't think people are generally insensitive. I don't think people, maybe I'm a bit naive, but I don't think generally people mean to be bad or mean to offend in any way. I think it's more, there's this unconscious bias that we have, or that we grow because it's not normal to us, because we haven't been immersed in an environment where there's somebody with disabilities, because we're not seeing it on our everyday life. Like, say, for example, I've noticed we have a TV station here called RTE. And in the last, say, year or so, they're trying to make it more diverse by the presenters not being just your typical Irish male or female person. So they're bringing diversity in with that feeling that you can't believe it unless you see it. So even women in sport, that if girls don't see women in sport on the TV, like all the big, say, we have Gaelic football here, GAA, all the Gaelic matches, the male, matches that be going on, they'd be all televised and everything else. Now, in recent years, the female matches are televised as well. So the younger generation come up, they're going, oh, okay, so the girls' match is just as important as the boys' match. So we're changing it that way. And I think it's the same with disability. There is an element of actually not understanding it. There is an element of stereotyping that, if you're physically disabled, you're also some way mentally incapacitated, which is not always the case. And even anybody with a brain injury, even though they may have a brain injury, doesn't mean they have a reduced capacity. For some, it might be that you have to slow it down, or you have to, take your time, or you might have to allow them the time to process the information, at a slower pace than somebody who doesn't have that disability. So there's ways around it, but I think the more we incorporate it into our environment, the more we embrace it, and the more we're not afraid to ask questions, or like, I've gone back to, say, my experience. I know, say, with my dad, he would have never said to somebody, I actually can hear you. I can hear quite well, where he probably should have done, but he would have been worried about offending somebody because he wouldn't have wanted to seem rude. But I think if you say it from a place of, just so you know, I can actually hear you, my hearing's perfect, or just, and then the people go, oh God, sorry, I didn't even realize I was doing that. And I think when it's done with that approach, where we do it from a place of kind of gentle education, as well as kind of, accepting that people sometimes just don't get it. Now, I'm sure there are people out there that actually do have a conscious bias that, maybe somebody that is different in some way is not is not at the same par as they are. But I think the majority of it is an unconscious bias. I don't think anybody really would, want to, I suppose, make somebody who is disabled feel any worse than maybe they are, or have their day harder or anything like that. Like, it's just, but we do need to educate, and we do need to bring it into our environment. It has to become the norm. I mean, one of the great people you could talk to this about is actually Niamh, because she's working with the Irish Wheelchair Association. So she's a great woman on diversity. But for my own personal experience, that's what it is. And of course, I suppose in my family now, my brother's wife has a brain injury, and, from things that has happened to her in the last couple of years. And so now you're looking at her young children living the experience that maybe we did, but it's different because they're surrounded by a family who understand it and who know what it is. And, and they have their father in the equation, or their dad, He's lived it, so he knows how to handle the situations. He knows how to bring kids and make them involved in it. And even adults. I mean, it's not just children, it's adults don't understand it. And they're uncomfortable sometimes with difference. And I think when we remove the fear, actually, I think that's what it is, Vikram. There's a fear, it's an unspoken fear we have of something different. And, it's not even a conscious fear. It's not something that we consciously think of. Like when you think of our prehistoric brain and you think that was, that's there to protect us. And the idea behind that prehistoric brain is that when there's something different, or there's something that might put us in danger, or there's something that we don't know, that we put in some sort of defense mechanism and are kind of, we're not as open because we go into protecting ourselves. Now, we haven't processed that thought. That's just, it's an unconscious bias that's gone straight to the amygdala, and we're figuring out how we deal with this situation. So there's a fear. But how do we bring those unconscious fears or thoughts, forward and be more open about them? Is actually to acknowledge them and to actually say, oh, I didn't know that. Or actually, I think I was a bit, to actually reflect. I mean, we've talked a bit to Michael about reflecting, but actually reflecting on our own actions and bringing it to the fore. So naming what our biases might be, or our unconscious bias might be. And I think when we accept that we all are biased in some way, I mean, we are, that's our makeup. I mean, bias has helped us in medieval times, or when we were out kind of foraging for food and everything else, it helps protect us. So it's part of our makeup and our DNA and everything else. But we can work to make it more open, and we can work to reduce that fear. And fear comes out of knowing and understanding. And in that knowing and understanding, I think we become a more inclusive world. And yeah, it sounds very simple. There's a lot, I know it's not as simple as that. But if each person worked on themselves, if everybody took the challenge to say, well, this year I'm going to try and notice what my biases are. And not try to change the world, but just to not even change themselves, but just to recognize that their bias is. And I think one time, it could have been Ken Cloak was talking one time about biases. It could have been on your show. I think it was actually, Vikram. And he was saying, biases is about recognizing your biases is about taking off the lens and putting on another lens to see a different spectrum as such. And I think that's what it is, that it's actually okay to have those biases, but we have to recognize them. We have to understand them. We have to, and see, are they right, or where they come from? I suppose for me, that's where my understanding comes from. So when I talk about my dad being disabled and that being a gift, the gift he gave me was the understanding of diversity and the understanding of things. And that's one of life's great lessons, So regardless of how difficult that was as children, or difficult it was for him, out of that difficulty and out of that trauma and whatever else it was, he'd 5 children, and his 5 children know what diversity is. They understand diversity, and they know how to, treat people with respect. They know how to think. So I honestly believe that a lot of when we're dealing with diversity or gender or respect for different genders and things, there has to be that bottom-up approach. It has to change with each individual. It has to change with each household. It has to change with each community, and it has to change. Now, that if we were to go just from the bottom up, it would take forever. But I think that if we take the top-down approach with it, and then we can bring it up gently, and when the top approach is there and policies have been put in place, and you've helped to build this community, it can meet somewhere in the middle, and the community is ready for those new policies and things, and they accept it with open arms, and it becomes the norm. And I think that's what it is. It's about becoming the norm.
Yeah. No, I think the important thing, is also the communication, what you were saying, that your father would not want to tell them about the fact that, look, I can hear, so I'm not offending them. And the other way around also, people do not approach people with disability maybe just because they feel they might get offended if you ask them what has happened. So I think both ways, people are just in general, maybe not just communicating with each other. And once you have that, start that basic conversation, you'll be able to understand and they can tell you. But you just keep that distance, maybe thinking that, look, should I even approach this subject? So that I think is also something which maybe we have to open out to. But your sister-in-law is now feeling better. I mean, things are getting better with her.
Yeah, she is. She's like, she's still in a wheelchair and will be. She does have a brain injury. But like, she's doing loads of rehab and she's at home with her family now. And she's making progress. They work very hard as a family to help her make that progress. So yeah, no, she's lucky and we're lucky. Because she has so much to offer the world. She has a brilliant mind. So we are lucky.
But I'm thinking from the physical disability wheelchair situation, the Stephen Hawking is quite a, I mean, example of someone who was on the wheelchair but still doing his work that he was doing, be it through that machine that he was talking. So I mean, people should understand, if that kind of an example is out there, that physical disability doesn't mean that the mind has stopped working. I think that needs to, you have someone there that's a prime example.
But you see, I think that's what happens with stereotypes, isn't it, Vikram? Like, you have a stereotype and then you have an exception to the rule. So it's like, you know, the stereotype remains, but he's an exception to the rule, you know, which and that causes the problem. So I think we need to realize that, you know, he's not just an exception to the rule, or, you know, and that's like, you know, maybe, I don't know, some, you know, female politician or female director is absolutely amazing. But she spoke about it as if, you know, she's an exception to the rule, where no, she's not an exception to the rule. She's just a brilliant person. And it's going back to this person who has managed to get to this place and managed things. And I think when we change the vocabulary from, and look, I'm very happy being female. I don't mean about that female thing, but when we're looking at people in society and in places of, be it politics, be it social environments, be it family environments, that, you know, that they're looked at as a person first. It's like, say, when you do family mediation, there's sometimes this perception that, you know, the husband is the one that leaves the house and the mother is the better, you know, with the kids. And sometimes that is the case, but sometimes it's not the case. And sometimes it is the case that actually the children might be better off with the dad, you know, or might be thing. And it's, you know, that's not a gender thing. It's based on the qualities they bring. And sometimes they work better as a team, you know, so it's based on the qualities they bring and how they can make, you know, the best impact, I suppose, on their children's life. And that, you know, men are often just as emotional as women in mediation. And it's not just, you know, female emotions, you know, so I've seen both sides of the coin. I've seen men in mediation where they're very factual and they just want to get the facts down. They just want to get it all sorted, done and dusted. And women then who'd be emotional. And then you'd see the other side where, you know, maybe the woman wants to get the finance sorted and the man is very emotional, or, you know, so there's different aspects come in, because when you go into that space of mediation, as you know yourself, Vikram, you're trying to move from those positions and you're trying to get to the interest and the needs. And when you're dealing with interest and needs, you're dealing with people. You're not dealing with genders. You know, one of their needs might be based on their gender, but it's generally that you're dealing with the person's need, not their needs because they're female or their needs because they're male.
So basically, it's going to go all around the basic thing that a person, you have to reach the person. But tell me, Andrea, why do we, I'm just saying we, I don't, maybe, but why do people label people? Why is this someone has to be Irish or Indian or male and female, young, old? Why do we label them? Why can't it be just a person? I think it goes
back. Yeah, we see, I think it goes back, Vikram, to our, you know, this prehistoric thing of having to be part of a tribe, that our safety came with belonging. And we need to belong to some sort of identity. And we might have different belongings within our lifetime. So one belonging might be that, you know, you're part of an Irish Catholic family. One part might be that, you know, you're part of a Muslim family who have moved into Ireland and are thinking, so that's their identity, and they might feel like they're, they want to stay within their own environment and their culture, even though they've moved to a different country. And then you might have that when kids go into, so say, for example, when teenagers go through that whole time of adolescence, they break away. Their family is their original tribe, and they start breaking away from their family, and they're finding a new tribe for themselves, and they're looking for that in their friends, and they're trying to figure out what tribe is going to work, what not. So they're trying to figure out where they belong. And I think that belonging comes from a sense of basic human survival, that we have to be part of a tribe. So in order for us to be part of a tribe, we have to have a label, because then how do you know which tribe you belong to? So I think we, rather than us all just being part of the tribe of mankind, we have to be part of, because mankind is too big of a tribe to survive, on its thing. So we break up into little sections, and these are all our little tribes and our little places of belonging. And when we feel like we belong or we fit in, there's a sense of safety within ourselves. It's like, there's a great book by Mari Fitzstuff, I think is her name. It's only a new book, and it's called Our Brains at War. And in one chapter, she talks about a rioting incident that went on in the UK. And in that rioting incident, it was people got involved in the riot because they wanted to be part. There was an adrenaline rush. They wanted to be part of the crowd. They wanted to be part of that belonging. That being part of that crowd was going to give them that sense of purpose. So people who would never been in trouble in their life, who would have never stole a thing, never looted, never anything, got involved in this looting. And during the cases that followed, people said, I don't know why I did it. I just got caught up in it, and so it didn't make sense. So it wasn't a rational thing to actually be part of it, even though they had to be accountable for it. It was a sense that they wanted to belong, they wanted to fit in, they wanted to be part of something. And I think that's where our labels come from. We want to belong, we want to fit in, and we want to be with people that understand us. So it's a bit like, you'd often see, I suppose on a more sinister level, people, trolls or people on the internet, and they try and, I suppose, make connections with children and pretend to be children, this, that, and the other. They understand that, those kids have certain needs. They understand that maybe they're missing some of those needs. They understand what their vulnerability, they know how to get their vulnerabilities. And when we get a sense that somebody understands us, or that they actually get it, we want to be part of their group, because we're not different anymore, because somebody else gets us, somebody else understands us. So it's like when we're, part of a female network group. They understand us, they get us, they understand that there's this, it's hard sometimes as a woman to put yourself forward. They understand that, in some ways we can carry an insecurity because we've spent generations being told we just weren't quite good enough. So that comes with us. That's like an inherited belief that we might have with us. So those women get that. They get that struggle. They feel that they have to work harder. So when we become part of that network, we feel supported because they get us. And even if then just say they go off in a different direction, which maybe doesn't align with our values, or we feel that's not right, we'd be reluctant to pull away from it because we don't want to be left out in the cold. We don't want to be on our own. We want to be part of that group. So there's a bit of that goes on as well. So I think that's where it comes from, Vikram. It comes from prehistoric times where survival was about being part of your tribe. And I think that's in us as humans. But I think we have evolved so much. We have to start talking about it and understanding why we feel the need to be part of a tribe, because it comes from a fear. And the biggest fear we have is that we won't be able to handle the situation if it happens. So what is the worst thing that could happen if, say take it from, say if there's a man that's worried about women coming, who is against women being at the same level. Now, this is just, hypothetically, just say there's a man and he's reluctant for women to come to the same level and this, that, and the other. What is his biggest fear? So his biggest fear might be that, well, if they're in that position, maybe I won't be in that position, and maybe that's going to push me down. So if I let them in, then I'm at danger of losing my position here, and it means I have some competition. So by keeping that down, it reduces the competition. But if we address that fear and we look at that fear and we have an open discussion about it and realize that actually that person could actually enhance and maybe open up more areas for you and maybe bring some knowledge that could support you as well. And that maybe with our yin and our yang, like our feminine and our masculine working together, that actually we could both achieve so much more. So I think when we remove fear from it and that feeling of belonging, but I don't think that fear will be removed until we start asking questions, until we start communicating, until we start being honest about our feelings and how it affects us, not in a way that we're, going in a conflict type of situation, but going in a way that we want an open discussion that allows for our feelings. And, conflict is something that offers us an opportunity to change. So if there is this conflict between men and women, well, and how they're going to progress in society, and we're in the professional environment within mediation, within the mediation room, well, then let's have the discussion. Let's use the conflict as an opportunity to change, but change for the better. And each of those, it's like, I don't know whether you've ever seen the picture of the two ladders, and one ladder has 10 steps and one ladder has 100 steps, but they all go up to the same level. And so maybe we have to take 100 steps to get there as opposed to the 10 steps. Or maybe we can take the 10 steps and get up there. But the important thing is that we take steps, and that we help each other along the way.
But from the example of this man you were saying, fear, I would still say, I would think it's insecurities. I think people live with a lot of insecurities. And the reasons for those insecurities, I think, need to be really got into, because sometimes they're just there for no reason, but they're there.
Yeah.
So that's one.
But do you not think, Vikram, that insecurity is a type of fear?
Yeah. No,
it's a fear of not being secure. So for me, insecurity, if I feel insecure, well, is that a fear of not being secure? So what do I need to feel secure? So what's missing? So what do I think? How do I think this can take away my security? So there's a fear that something in that can take away the security. And sometimes we don't know. We don't know, because so much of our, especially our unconscious biases, are unconscious. So we don't know. So we do have to dig. We do have to ask questions. We do have to self-examine, become self-aware, self-reflect, and do those things. And, as I said earlier on, if everybody if everybody took on the challenge to address one of their biases or one of the things and understand it, that would make such a huge difference. It's the little steps, it's all the little steps.
So first step is that we have to reprogram our prehistoric mind. That's what we have to do. Find a way to do that. The second thing is to even think that this group understands me. I think we have to move from that, because what we're doing is then we are creating groups within groups within groups, because we feel people don't keep narrowing it down to they understand me and I'm part of that. And then that obviously will lead to the others not understanding you. So finally you're stuck into these boxes of your own, because you've created those boxes to start with. So finally it goes down to the person, that we are just people by ourselves. Because I keep telling people about the fact that Indian, I mean, come off it, 1.3 billion people, can I represent them? How do I represent them? Because it's just something which I don't know how people even think they can stereotype people. Like I said, for Indians, I mean, otherwise also for anyone, how do you even do that? Look, I did put your country right now in front of your name. You hadn't put it, but because people should know that, look, you might have stereotypes of Irish people, but here you can listen to her. Does she fit into your stereotype? So people should, I think that education or maybe interactions, I think those have to increase to be able to understand there is no difference. I think we were discussing when you came on in conversation, the beautiful mind, that the accent might be different, but how does that take away from the person? I mean, the person has been speaking in that way. That's their way of speaking, but does that really mean that you're going to label the person as a different person because of the accent or whatever else, the way they look, what they wear? So I think the getting down to the person has not happened, because maybe at that point of time, when that prehistoric mind did not have time for all those things to be able to differentiate. But at this, I think now we just have. Yeah, so I think now we have to be able to get and find out about people, communicate with them, and understand that there are such common things between us. I mean, are people, so everything is what each of us has, the other person has, just to connect to that aspect of it, not the different aspects of us, but the similarities of us. Maybe people are not connecting to that, to be able to stay in that little group of theirs, because they find security in that group of theirs, like you were saying, that find that security, so they want to keep that difference and keep looking out for those differences. While to merge with the larger whole, you must look at similarities. So now we have to move away from that prehistoric mind and start looking at a simulation.
Yeah, and maybe one of the ways of moving away from that prehistoric mind, that our mutualization is actually in our differences. That the acceptance that the difference is what makes us the same. So you and I are completely different. Vikram, we're in different parts of the world, but what makes us the same is that we both enjoy our differences. So that's our mutualization. We enjoy our differences. We both enjoy different cultures. We both enjoy learning about different cultures, but we are different. And that's actually where the connection comes, because we're different, because we want to learn, because we want to know. So wouldn't it be lovely if our differences became our point of connection, as opposed to our sameness? So if we could move, if we could it's like when you're in the mediation room and you're mutualizing, and you're trying to bring how they're the same and maybe want the same, and but another very powerful thing in the mediation room is to actually point out their differences and how they're different, and actually how that's okay. That they're different people, and they think, and when there's an acceptance of difference, it can be just as powerful as a mutualization. And I love that when you see somebody accepting a difference in somebody, and understanding that maybe that comes from, maybe how they argue or something. That could be something very similar. It could be based on, where they, their family upbringing or their family of origin, and how they handled conflict. And when they realize that actually, that difference is okay, and that makes them who they are. That can be as powerful as the sameness and the mutualization.
Because I was still wanting people to identify that sameness in the sense of, okay, this person is also a good human being. I'm down to such basic aspects of people, that similarity is what you need. Beyond that, the outer part of it, like you said, different in the sense of being brought up in a different part of the world, or speaking a different language, and maybe thoughts also, because of the fact that you grow up in a certain environment. Obviously thoughts on certain things will be different, but when you start discussing them, you'll find out that in the core of it, the understanding of it remains the same. So that aspect is common. It's not going to be common with everyone. Everyone's not going to understand things the same way as you understand them, but there will be people who do. So that similarity in terms of your being able to reach that kind of person who understands things the way you do, not because they have grown up in the same environment, because their thought process is the same in some way. So maybe those common aspects of it.
But that's interesting. Actually, the thought process, where we might be similar is actually internally, as regards kind of how we think and how we process our thoughts and everything else. It's fascinating that I was doing a little bit of research for myself, because I was working with like families as a group. And one of the things since COVID that has come up is the level of, say, anxiety and stuff like that. So I was doing kind of a bit of research around anxiety, and, how I could help the participants in the room around anxiety. And one of the interesting things that came up about the prehistoric brain is that there's a certain percentage of us that are born with a larger amygdala than others. So if you have the larger amygdala, you have a more anxious brain. So you are more predisposed to go towards conservative politics as opposed to liberal politics. So it actually, that's genetic makeup, that's DNA, so there's very little we can do about that, but we need to understand that. We need to understand as well that some people are just made different. They even the way we think, our brains are different. Like, it's not just our bodies or our color or our language or our beliefs, but our brains are different and our brains function differently as well. So we have to, allow for those differences to work together. We have to, I wouldn't even say allow is probably the wrong word. I'd say understand those differences. Sorry, Vikram, your mic.
Just give me 1 second. Just one. That was also important when client calls. It's also important to take that. I'm really sorry about that, but that was
okay.
important.
No, that's very important.
But I tell you, this in terms of thought process, I was telling Ken about this fact that I don't read books that are part of it. I was telling him, look, if you have people around you who would process things from the book the same way that you would, and they can give you a summary of what they read, and they can do it. I mean, look, you can actually put a book down to maybe not a few sentences, but you can summarize it. So if Andrea reads 10 books in the month, and so do 10 other people that I know, so you've read 100 books, and you can give me an essence of 100 books. Why do I have to read it? Because I will get the same thing out of that book. So that is why the thought process and having the people with the same thought process changes. But again, maybe it goes back to the aspect of tribe. I mean, is it you changing the concept of the tribe? It is not the color of the skin or whatever other things that you have around you, which region you are from, but actually, like we were saying about thought process. So that becomes a tribe by itself then. That, okay, people with the similar thought process on things. And then obviously that comes down to various, maybe a stand on a certain issue, and whatever else. I mean, in terms of, like you said, the writing kind of thing, suddenly being part of something that at that moment your thought process connects. Later you might just say that, look, I don't know what happened to me, but at that point of time, somewhere that thought process connected with each other, and you went about doing something which you maybe later reasoning changes your concept of what you did. But somewhere I think there is that concept of getting certain thought process together. But Andrea, but I mean, you were living all throughout in where you're staying now, or you were in various parts of Ireland?
No, I've lived. For my childhood, I lived in Dublin, which is the capital city, just on the outskirts there of Dublin. And now I live in Meath, which is just on the outskirts of Dublin, but a different county. And so I've stayed very much close to home over all the years. I'm only about, I'd say, 15 miles, if even 15 miles, probably 12 miles from my original family home. So I can drive there in 15, 20 minutes. And my mother still lives in the house, so where I grew up. So so I haven't moved too far. I've kind of stayed, but my kids are all fascinated with travel, which is very interesting. But I do think when you grow up in a house where you work together like that as a team, and there's disability and things like that, for me at a certain age there was a sense of responsibility that that you were needed. So you didn't go too far because you were needed, and that's okay. Like, I'm fine with that. Like, but I look, say, with my eldest is 26, then 22, and then 15, well, 16 now next week. But with them, they've all traveled. Like, my son studied abroad. My daughter has studied in France and Spain and is due to go off again now in the summer. So they all love to travel. They love to see the world. They love differences. They love learning new, about new cultures. They love the whole thing. So even in the little spaces I've lived in my life, which is fairly closed, that sense of understanding differences, embracing differences, being part of something that's different is something that I hope I passed on to them, and that they go out and they see the world, they make friends, and see, that's what it is. It's about immersing yourself into differences. And when we're immersed in something that's different, it's no longer different. There's no longer a fear. There's no longer a misunderstanding. We get to understand it. So I suppose really it's about the immersion. It's about immersing ourselves into that. It's about, being part of the difference. And when we become part of the difference, then we learn to understand it.
Well, no, I was asking you that because now that you'll take us through women and mediation, so we're talking about a wider understanding from the Irish experience or wherever else. So I'm just trying to get that, but because we are going to talk about women in mediation now, right? So you're going to tell us about how you are looking at, look, there are various aspects of it. One is in the mediation world, the situation with women, how they are looked at as, like Sarah was saying, being appointed as mediators in certain kind of things. One is that aspect of it. The other thing, in the process, how you think in the process, it doesn't make any difference or not. And then as parties in the mediation, and whether they are, I mean, maybe community mediation and those kind of areas, are women coming in as parties to the mediation or playing a background role, those experiences also. And then what does women actually signify when we talk about women in mediation? Because I was talking to Sarah about the aspect of, we have this half man, half woman god that we have. So I was trying to, we didn't build too much on that, but the fact that is that when we say women in mediation, the women part of men also in mediation also we need to discuss.
Feminine.
Yeah,
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 the feminine. I
exactly.
think
Yeah,
that is, yeah, I think that is. I think I mean, going back to this people thing, that we all have a feminine side and we all have a masculine side. And you know, that, but in females, the feminine side is more acceptable. So if you get a woman who is quite masculine in her approach to her profession, or masculine in her approach to ambition, there's kind of, there might be, now I'm talking from my experience, there might be a judgment on that, let's put it that way, where, you know, and in the same regard, maybe, you know, if a man was seen as being, you know, more, I suppose, the feminine in that being gentle, soft, creative, that whole feminine side of his personality, well, maybe he's not seen as the same regard. So is it that we see the feminine not as weaker, but that the masculine is more important? The masculine is what's going to get it done. The masculine is driving, I suppose, in that it's driven, it's fast, it's determined. And then the feminine is soft and gentle and emotionally aware, and, you know, that will take the time to you know, to develop something creatively. So I think I think we all have that bit of us in it. And I think sometimes we have to lean into the masculine side. Sometimes we have to lean into the feminine side. In mediation, my experience and I can only talk from my experience in mediation is that, and I deal with family, mainly family. So for me, that approach, because it is very emotional, you're talking about families who are breaking up, you're talking about loss of relationships, you're talking about things. So for me, taking the feminine approach, or using my feminine, it kind of, I suppose, characteristics, really helps in that room, because it brings a sense of safety and gentleness and everything else. Now, that's not to say there isn't female women, you know, female mediators out there who are very factual, who are very driven, who just go in and say, okay, so today we're discussing assets. What are the assets? And just, okay, so what do you want? You know, that takes that approach. It's not to say that there isn't that, not that they'd be that crude about it. I don't mean that, but, you know, the more driven kind of thing of it. So I do think definitely there'd be more females in around kind of family, community mediation. When you go up workplace, I'd say it'd kind of be a mixture, but definitely when you go to the commercial end of it, it's probably more male dominated.
So that's what I'm saying. We need to also put it down to, if you're saying that we, in terms of traits, masculine, feminine traits. So in mediation, are there, I mean, those might be traits that you need, and maybe those are traits that are better off, you're better off with. And I'm not saying it only women would have it. Yes, like you said, men will also have it. So is it that as we go along and we study and ask people a little more, would we find out that the feminine side is something which is more important in mediation? I'm not saying I have a conclusion on this. I'm just saying that to put out a discussion on this, that what
I think if the feminine side is, if we're defining the feminine side as, you know, understanding, emotional awareness, you know, nurturing, place of safety. Yeah, it probably in the area that I work in, it probably would be more necessary, because they can only get to the facts once all that's been done first.
Because it's a little dangerous, obviously, because of the way the activism happens, to say that there are some feminine traits and some masculine traits. That by itself is also a little dangerous for people to even understand and even talk about. So of course we are going to talk about it. We don't have a problem, but I'm saying that some people might not come out and talk about it, saying that, no, how can you put it down to a feminine trait? Why women can do this? Why can, that kind of discussion. So but we are still going to talk about it.
Yeah, and that's why I said if we're defining feminine as, but Vikram, there's plenty of men that would be more, and I feel there's a real danger when we go into them and us, because when we go into them and us, we stereotype, and then when we stereotype, we're different, and we're just making that difference bigger. So I think this conversation has to be about understanding and, I suppose, accepting of differences, and giving, like I said about the different jobs, like giving the same level of respect for the differences. So, okay, there is some differences there, and maybe not everybody experiences those differences, but, when we look at us as people and not as a gender, then it is like what you're, the Indian thing that you were saying about the feminine side and the masculine side. And then there's a bit of that in all of us. And at different times, we need to call in the feminine side, and other times we need to call in the masculine side. So, yeah, I do worry sometimes this conversation can dig down into them and us. And actually, if you look at it as a broader issue, and how society, so everything we experience, even say if we go back to our prehistoric brain, everything we experience, everything our brain takes in, our perceptions, is all about, our experiences, things that knowledge that we've gained along the way, and maybe traumas that we've experienced and everything else. And that all makes up our decision-making process. So if sorry, go ahead, Vikram.
No, but what I was trying, maybe what we can do is, because of the fact that, let's move, okay, man and woman, okay, that's a difference that we talk about, but feminine traits and masculine traits, not connecting them to a man and a woman as so that's, maybe we can look at it from that perspective. Okay, these are feminine traits. It has nothing to do with a woman, but yes, it's commonly associated with women. Maybe it's incorrect to do it. Maybe it's incorrect to do it, and that's why the stereotyping happens. That's not connected to man or woman. Let's look at, these are feminine traits, these are masculine traits, and these are what, maybe in a mediation, these are traits which are useful, because obviously when people talk about commercial, they try and differentiate between traits required, but should it be done or not? Is the process more important than the way certain aspects need to be brought in? And then it's a larger discussion. We do it.
Yeah, I think it's like it's you could talk about it, as we say here in Ireland, until the cows come home. But it is a thing that to provide. I think you need both. I think you need both, because there is no point in bringing the feminine energy in, where that sense of emotion and safety and everything else, and that gentleness and creativity, if we don't bring in the other end, the masculine energy, where the deal is brokered, the negotiation is done, the hard facts. I think they both have to work together, but one has to maybe support the other, one maybe has to incorporate the other. And I think the thing about mediation is that every single case you do is different. So every single case you do is dealing with two different people. So there is no two mediations the same. So as a mediator, when you go into that room, you understand, because you've probably done your pre-mediations, you've grasped a knowledge of who these people are and what they're about. And then when you go into the mediation room, at that stage, when you're having your joint session, you should have developed an understanding of those people, so that you know what's needed here, what's going to help them, come to an agreement, what's going to help them have the discussion. And if you understand the people in the room, you might have said, oh, actually, this person doesn't like the emotions, doesn't like going down that track. And actually, if I go down the track of emotions too much here, they're going to run or they're not going to stick it out. And, you know, so maybe I need to kind of take a different approach. So I do think it's all about knowing who your clients are. It's about understanding, you know, their background and what they're bringing into the mediation room. And then as a mediator, you know, know what you need to bring in. It's like, you know, do I need to lower my tone? Do I need to talk? And I mean, I talk quite fast. So do I need to slow it down? Do I need to be more gentle? Or do I need to get more assertive because they're, you know, they're actually a high conflict and I need to be more assertive. So I need to make my presence felt so that they understand that they, you know, the ground rules need to be followed, or they need to be there to hold the space in the room. So I suppose in answer to your question, every mediation is different. And I think when we understand our clients or the participants, well, then we understand what energies we need to bring into the room as the mediator.
Yeah, so it should be, I mean, to tap into every aspect of it. I mean, there is no concept of saying that this will not, that is not required. It depends on the circumstance. We need all of those things to be tap into, definitely. But again, is it something where on a general basis we say, okay, these are things which you tap into a little more and these you tap into a little less? Well, that discussion will go on. So that's not a problem. But of course, maybe, but what we still need to start with is the aspect of being a woman in the mediation world. Is there anything in terms of a difference that you saw or that you feel?
Do I feel different? I suppose I'm surrounded by, so most of, say, the mediators I'm in contact with, say in Ireland, if I go that, have to actually happen to be female. So there's a huge, I think I gave the statistics on the last talk we did. I think there was something like in the MII membership, the Mediators Institute of Ireland, I think that was at February, whenever we did it, there was something like 57% of the membership was women. So there's a huge cohort of female mediators in this country. Are they, when you break them down into who's earning what, there's not an awful lot of research done on it as regards gender division. There is Heidi Riley, that one I was telling you about earlier on. She did some research, but that was based on Northern Ireland, and based on that, you know, women were kind of based on the ground roots in peace building. And really that what we should do, what the research found is that as female mediators, we should be encouraging younger women to come into mediation and to actually mentor them and bring them up to a level that they are at the higher paid mediation jobs. So I suppose that's been my experience of it. I've never felt, and it could be the area I work in. Like if you talk to somebody who's in commercial mediation, Vikram from Ireland, they could say to you, oh no, there's a huge divide. People prefer men to women. People prefer, you know, their experience. And so if you are a woman coming from an experience of, I don't know, being, you know, having various different, say like me, for example, who has had various different careers, who took a step back from her professional life to rear her children, but still kind of worked, taking things over. So if I went into the commercial field, would they acknowledge the experience I've gained over those years, the same way as they do acknowledge the experience of a man who has been in a directorship position of a banking institution or something, and they then went to turn to mediation, would they see me as being competent enough to mediate their commercial dispute? Now, some of the things that would come into that is that, well, one, I actually, now not that you necessarily need the knowledge, but you do need a certain understanding of commercial terminology and stuff like that. So would I feel I was competent enough to go into that commercial? And now, based on my experience now and what I'm doing, I personally don't feel it would. Could I be competent enough? Of course I could. Of course I could. If I went and got the, you know, the experience or got the, you know, whatever other knowledge I needed to gain to do it, could I have that same competency? Of course I could. And I don't doubt it for 1 minute. So I suppose the answer to the question is I'm uncomfortable answering for other women. because I think every woman's experience is different. And for me, for mediation and for women in mediation, I know certainly in Ireland, there's a great cohort of women who are pushing mediation, and men, I would say, but there is, from what my circle, there's a huge cohort of women pushing for mediation and, trying to bring mediation into the forefront, trying to bring cases out of the court system into a mediation process. So I don't know whether that answers your question, Vikram. I'm probably skirting around it in that I'm probably uncomfortable talking for other women as regards their experience.
What we're doing is basically we're just putting certain points out, which will be, of course, we'll take up with other people and we'll have discussions. Because this is not like this is a discussion which has to go on. Whether it should go on or not, also we will discuss whether it should at all. But I think that concept is that there is a certain maybe understanding that people have of what a mediation is, and are they looking for a certain, say in commercial matters, are they looking for a certain kind of a mediation because that's what they've been told about or that's what they've experienced, and then that aspect of the masculine traits are important in that kind of mediation, so a man is required because he has the masculine traits. So so that aspect also, is it correct to have that view on mediation itself? Because
and the other situation is that sometimes you'd go into a mediation and somebody might want a co-mediator because they want a balance in the room. They want a male and female. I don't want a female mediating, my breakdown of my assets. I want somebody, because they might feel that the female will be biased towards the wife in some way, or biased towards, the split of how the finances are distributed. So sometimes you might be asking, if you're co-mediating, well, can I have a male co-mediator in the room with you?
But this is where I'm bringing out the difference. I'm saying, do you want to bring in a woman, or you want to bring in someone with the feminine traits? Would you want to bring in a man, or you want to bring in a person with masculine traits? I'm trying to differentiate the two because of the fact that then that whole man-woman thing goes away. So it's now about.
I do think for people to know that they want the feminine traits and the masculine traits, there's a level of self-awareness that comes about that, because to be self-aware that you do have both traits, and most people do, and that, one might be more heightened in the female, and where in the male it's there's the other one heightened.
No, I'm saying, it's like, can you tap into those or not? I mean, I'm sure they're all there with everyone. It's just the fact, can you tap into it at all? And how do you? So that's I think that's very important. When some people tap into it a little more, maybe certain aspects. So obviously those things come out as this person has this kind of quality, or this person has these traits, or this person handles things in this way. So whatever word they might use to convey it, but I think everyone understands that there are certain aspects that the person brings in, and that is, and if those are important, they'll bring that person in. I'm saying person. I'm trying to distinguish it from the gender part of it.
We'll have to get somebody to translate this whole conversation, Vikram, because we're tying ourselves up in knots here.
But in general, when you talk to women in Ireland or outside, what is the impression that you are getting in terms of the mediation world and women's position in that, or the way they are looked at? I mean, have you ever had these discussions with anyone on this?
Yeah, and I did, and I think, for the women I've spoken to, there's that thing that their experience should be given the same weight, regardless of what their experience is as a mediator. That life experience, wherever that life experience is, should be given the same level of respect and importance when they are presented as a mediator. And I think the other thing is that, for, say, mediation at government level or at higher levels, that there needs to be a track in some way that, maybe the door is more open to women going in there. But I don't know, a discussion I had the other day was, I don't know that I would be comfortable, I'm talking about me personally, being given a position because somebody has to do a gender balance, and so we need a woman, because we had to do a gender balance. I'd like to think that if anything like that happened, that it was based on, you know, the expertise you could bring. It was based on the knowledge you were bringing. It was based on your experience you were bringing, and it, you know, and that's what it was based on, rather than your gender. Because I don't think that's doing us any favor, because that's saying, well, you're not quite as good, or you are different, and we're just picking you because we need to get the gender balance, instead of actually saying, okay, no, you are just as good, and yet that position is yours because you could do the job.
Exactly.
So,
no, I think this balance is really, really important, because going towards reverse bias or reverse discrimination is also not good, just because of the fact you have to be seen as an organization or wherever that, no, we are diverse. Just to show diversity, you can't be doing this to people. I mean, this is an issue that definitely needs to be discussed. But on the other end, people say, look, we have been discriminated against, so we need to be brought in, because otherwise we would not be brought in. So I think that's the balance. But I mean, look, finally, in general, I mean, as we go along, and that discrimination aspect, what has happened in the past, we can't do maybe too much about it. But yes, we are trying to, in whatever way, compensate for it. Yes, I'm sure that also is required, because I can't speak for people who have been discriminated, because definitely I'm not on that side, and what all they've seen. There are issues there. But at the end of the day, finally, at some point of time, equal playing field has to be there. I mean, because otherwise what will happen is, say if you have a person who runs very fast, but there are other people, because if you look at the starting lineup for the 100-meter race in the Olympics, what do you see? I don't see too much of a colored aspect of it. They seem to be all a certain color. But does that mean that we are going to take that away only because they are good, and we would bring in someone because we want to be diverse? So when you look at sports, I think that is one area where you see that diversity is not always good. The first thing is that how fast can the person run is all that matters. So I think that's what we have to understand, that you just cannot create diversity for the sake of creating diversity also. I mean, you have to be careful on that. I mean, really careful on that. Because
you do.
Because someone who's...
And I think... I do think things. I do think there is, you know, there's definitely changes. Like, I mean, it's different from when you were younger, Vikram. It's different from when I was younger. It's probably be different for my girls, and that, you know, I think, say for men, you know, say going out there who have daughters, who've watched their daughters study, work hard, and think they want their daughter to do just as well as they want their son to do. You know, because they've seen the hard work and that stuff going. So the roles have changed in society. Well, definitely in Irish society, the roles have changed. And so there's a recognition of that role change. So I do think, probably not quick enough, but I do think there will be that, you know, that change is there. There's definitely, you know, a change, even as regards kind of, you know, say women getting married, women having children, women having, you know, and while there's probably still pressure on them for that, it's probably not the same pressure that was there 2 generations ago.
No, but I think the thing is that, look, within the bubble that I live in, obviously in that bubble, these issues are not there. But when I look at like you said about choice, a woman makes a choice and she says, I want to look after my children. Should that be taken as something that she's doing because she's a woman? No, because that's a person taking a choice in a marriage. A woman wants to take that role, or a man wants to take that role. It's just left to them to do. Yeah, and when a woman takes it, oh, she's yeah.
So say if I don't know, say the woman is the primary earner in the house, and you know her career is actually going to bring more money into the house, or she's more focused career wise, or she's more career driven, and maybe her partner in life is not career driven, maybe is not earning as much, and it makes actually more sense, economic sense, for him to be the one that stays at home and looks after these. Is he any less of a parent because he's a man? No, he's not. Do you know what I mean? So, well, I don't think so anyway. But like, you know, if he's at home and he's looking after the kids, I don't know. Is there certain things he can't do as well as a woman? Maybe not. Maybe he can. Maybe he can do better. As I said, in my household as a child growing up, with different jobs. And one of mine was cooking, but my brother's a much better cook than I am now. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I'd go to his house for dinner quicker than I'd bring him to my house for dinner. So, like, does our, I suppose, our family of origin predetermine how we view genders or how we view the feminine and masculine? Not necessarily. I think if we reflect on it and we understand it and we kind of go, that was the way of the world then, it's different now. Well, then
Again,
you know,
prehistoric times, and the role given because of a certain reason, maybe because of the fact,
yeah,
maybe the hunting was something which had a certain physical state that was required, maybe because of that that was chosen for you, whatever the reason. Look, we'll have to go back to the prehistoric thing. I mean, I'm
it is,
sure.
and that's the thing. Yeah, and that's where it goes back. And again, that book with the Brain at War, one of the things that came up was about how young men were seen to be, neurologically predisposed to want to have a heroic role in some way, that, they were driven towards heroic roles. And, so that's why, say, even for some young men, being part of an army or being part of something that had power in it or offered them a sense of power was something that they thrived on, but actually was based on this whole neuroscience thing of having the heroic sense about it. It's fascinating. It's fascinating, Vikram. Yeah.
But the important thing is that over time, like, warfare has changed. Now, a woman or a man is not the what physical state you are in. It's because if you're flying an aircraft, a fighter jet, it doesn't matter. You don't need that physical aspect of it. You need to control the aircraft. So that is changing. So in that sense, I mean, reworking on what the understanding of the requirement of a certain physical aspect, that definitely will keep changing. But are we willing to change it or not? Or everyone wants to change it, but no one wants to talk about it? Oh, I don't know. Okay, but these are the discussions, Andrea. With this will obviously happen, but
discussions are good, Vikram. So even if they're kind of going around in circles, or they kind of, it's not going to bring us to a point that we solve it on this day.
We're not going to do it. I need all those women to come and talk about it. Otherwise, if we solve it, what about all those conversations which have to happen?
Yeah, but what's important, Vikram, is that the conversation is happening, and even within women who have in mediation, so we're all mediators, we're all female. Even within that tribe, as we were talking of female mediators, and we have a lot of things in common, and we would have experienced a lot of life things. We would have maybe in some way experienced discrimination because of being female, and I would say there's very few women who haven't experienced that at some stage in their life. So I would say, within that tribe, we all have that similar experience, but we are also different. So how we view our experience is different. Some of us might take that experience as something that we learned from. Somebody else might take it as an experience that it's something that we have to fight for. Somebody might take it as an experience that, okay, we need to have a conversation. This needs to change. And, what way do we go about changing this? Somebody else might come from, have the thought that, it's never going to change. Why bother? We are different. And nothing's going to change the fact that we are different. And so, so we, even within our group of female mediators that you brought together, and even though we have all our similarities, we have all our mutualizations, we have all the things that are the same, we all are bringing different perspectives. And it's still different perspectives and experiences that needs to be discussed. But the other interesting thing is, is that men need to be part of the discussion as well. Yeah, because definitely. This won't change with just women talking about it. Men need to be part of the discussion. So you are part of the discussion, which is brilliant.
Am I part of the discussion?
Maybe not today, Vikram. Maybe not today. But so you tell me, Vikram, what do you think? What do you think is the way forward?
Look, I'm telling you, for the bubble that I live in, there is no concept of man, woman, differentiation, discrimination. There's no concept of all that. So that's why I have to have these discussions to be able to understand what people are going through, how they look at it. Because look, it's a little complex. Now, the thing is that, say, because of the way whatever this feedback that I'm getting in terms of commercial matters and family matters and that difference. So the only thing is that if a person is a mediator is appointed in a commercial matter, and the person happens to be a man, but because someone has gauged that person, I'm not saying man or woman, gauge that person to be someone they would want in that matter. Now, because it's a man, to say now a man has been appointed, because and there is some discrimination there, we should not go in that direction also. I mean, is it actually a discrimination because that person has an ability? We're in a way putting down that person's ability and saying, no, you got it because you're a man. But some people, I'm not saying women, or in general people, some people feel no, the person has got it because the person is a man. So that also needs to be looked at in a very objective manner. So let's not rush into it also. But because the larger numbers available to people are that, look, there is this boys club or men's club in arbitration, is it being created in mediation or not? We have to look at it, because if it is, then obviously we should be looking at working around it, and maybe how we can do something about it. We should. That's why I'm having these discussions, because is something developing? Because I don't see it happening right now. I don't see it as much, but in some jurisdictions it seems to be happening. So I mean, like Sarah had some issues on that, and I think Janice had something to say from the US perspective. So if it's happening in these places, these are not representative of the world. They're not. But there are maturer markets in terms of mediation. So in maturer markets, has it moved in that direction, or is it because from the legal profession people moved into, from arbitration they move as from arbitrators to move to being mediators? So the same aspect got carried on into mediation there. But here, is it developing in other countries? Is it developing differently? So I think that also needs to be looked at and discussed. And I don't want it to become something as a general thing to say just because in some mature markets it happened that way. So I don't know whether you consider Ireland to be a mature market in terms of mediation. So is it, or is it not?
Mediation first came into Ireland in the 70s, I think. I could be wrong, or 82. It could be the Family Mediation Services set up. I could be wrong with that date, Vikram, but I think that's so. It's relatively new. Like in comparison to the US and Canada, it would be relatively new here as such. But interestingly, is that as mediation takes, I suppose, begins to, I suppose, take momentum, what you'll find is there's a larger number of people within the legal profession coming into mediation or training as mediators. So what happens then when you go to commercial cases? Are they going to pick somebody based on them having a legal background because, they feel that they will have the legal understanding, for that commercial case? I don't know. So what do we do about that? And I think really it's about having a discussion. It's about being open. It's about opening up the dialogue and saying, well, is this happening here? What do we need to be aware of? What do we, how do we as mediators in Ireland want to move this forward? What is important to us as mediators, regardless of gender or anything else? And if there is something that makes, that is necessary for commercial mediation, well, then how can we make sure that's available for people who want to work in that area and maybe haven't had training in that area, or maybe don't have the background that's needed? And why is that background needed? So why is it important to have a certain background when you're mediating? So is that a need? Is that needed in the mediation? Or is that a perception of the clients or the participants of the mediation? So is that what they perceive that's needed?
Well, that's why.
When in fact, is it what's actually needed?
That's why Andrea, that discussion on decolonization is important. It's linked to this, because that whole conditioning of the mind that dispute resolution happens in courts and lawyers are part of it. So that perception or that conditioning, we need to change that also. So for that, people have to understand mediation. That is it that you need someone with that whole legal knowledge in a mediation? Although, of course, there is some legal part which would be obviously part of a mediation, would be most of the time. But can you not bring in a lawyer like any expert? Which is what I've been trying to say, that in a mediation there will be all kinds of, there'll be technical issues, which would come up. So you'll get a person with that kind of a technical background, and you will get that. Does that mean that only that person can do that mediation only because say the project, there's a project there, and someone who's been part of only projects can do that mediation? It doesn't. I think we need to, first of all, people have to understand what mediation is and how it works. For
Yeah.
that the user, there has to be enough user experiences to do that. And of course, the larger the whole conditioning of the mind to change something that has happened over hundreds of years, that is the way a colonizer put that into your mind, that no, you have to come to me and my courts, and that is where justice will be done, that is where dispute resolution will be done, and we have these people who will do it for you or will help you do it. So that has to be something that we have to start working on, because that's going to affect things.
And, you know, interestingly, that's where the feminine comes in, Vikram, because it's that creativity, that's, you know, that sometimes when we don't have the facts, when we don't have the understanding, we can come from a place of curiosity, because we need to understand. And when we need to understand and we ask questions from a point of curiosity, it allows the participants or the clients to actually unfold. And sometimes when they start unfolding the facts, there's little gifts in there of, you know, places, you know, zones of kind of negotiation that might happen. And maybe if we went in there as a mediator and knew all the facts, that actually those questions of curiosity wouldn't come, because we would think we know it all, like we know the answers. But when we don't know, we actually have the opportunity to ask questions from a place of curiosity. And when we ask them from a place of genuine curiosity and wanting to understand, it can open up the dialogue in a completely different way.
I think the important thing also is that, can you pick up in terms of law? Say there's a legal aspect that you need to pick up from there. Can you pick it up or not? That you have that capability of doing it, but the process is something you can handle well. So, you know, I mean, you have the process knowledge, and you're a process expert or whatever. I mean, I'm not, I'm using the word expert, but someone who really can handle the process properly. So is that the most important thing? Because that is what I would think is important. But also to say that you cannot even understand other aspects, the law related aspects, the technical related aspect, you have no capability of understanding it, then obviously there will be issues. But if you can pick up,
yes, of course,
someone, yes, so someone comes in and explains certain things and you can pick up from there, it's good enough. I mean, you don't, as a lawyer also, everyone thinks a lawyer will know all the laws in the world. It's never going to happen. So you can actually get in as a lawyer also. I can get in a lawyer if I need support on a very specific aspect of the law. Why not?
Yeah, and you know, it's not even just saying commercial mediations, but if you're doing other types of mediation and there might be, you know, an issue, maybe one person has a, you know, competency issue in some way, that you actually can get somebody in to support them and help you understand what that is. Or say if you're dealing with family and, you know, there's something that you feel they might need something that's outside your remit, be it like that, you know, they need advice from a psychologist or they need something like that, that you can actually, you know, hold the mediation and let them go and talk to that expert who's that, because we can't be an expert in everything, and let them go to that person, find out the information they need to find, and come back into the mediation room, share that information, and then move forward with that information. So I think as mediators, and I know this is probably different to the feminine, we're probably gone off track here, but I think as mediators, not to be afraid to say, I actually don't know that, but I know somebody, or I can refer you to somebody, or we can organize somebody that can help you or tell you that or inform me on that. And I think that's, like you, I would agree that it's known, understanding the process, allowing for the process for that information. But I mean, we do, realistically, we do. Like, I couldn't do family mediation without having an idea of the way the family courts work, or the way, you know, I suppose, you know, whatever acts there is in relation to children, or, you know, as regards kind of separation. And I mean, there might be, say, an adjustment order needed for pensions. I'd need to know, I wouldn't be divulging that as an advisor because I'm not from a legal background, but I need to have an idea of that stuff. so that when it comes up in the room, I can point them in the right direction.
But how I look at it is that if someone is open enough to say that, look, I need to maybe read this part of it, let me read it. But when I read it, I can pick up from it. So it's not something that I'm saying that even in the law that in law in general, say in a country like ours, and maybe Ireland also, a decision of a higher court, say the Supreme Court of India, when it gives a judgment, that becomes law. In our constitution, it says the judgments of the Supreme Court are law. So that can change every day. Today, the Supreme Court might have made a decision which could have changed the law totally. So I can't keep a tab of every judgment that comes out of the Supreme Court. But if an issue is there, can I pick it up if I need to? Or can I get someone in to tell me about it who's working only in that area? Why not? So it's not moving away from the aspect of the discussion is because finally, if the process is important, then what are the certain basics in the process which are very, very important? And then maybe not so important. Then, okay, maybe not if they're there. Maybe we can divide that. Then are those feminine traits or feminine aspects of handling it or masculine way of handling it? And that is where that discussion comes around, because the process by itself, first of all, has its importance, and what aspects of it are important, and how do you divide that? So maybe somewhere there, maybe we are connecting to the whole thing.
Yeah.
So okay. So that's a discussion we need to have. But beyond that, as parties in the mediation, what have you experienced in terms of parties in the mediation, and is there a gender aspect there that you have seen a difference in, or something there on the comments of that?
I would find, I suppose, in my own experience, I find women are funny, and for me, it's I would suppose 7 times out of 10, like it would be the man that contacts me regarding mediation, but is the woman that is more open to mediation, if that makes sense, even though they both agree to the process, but the woman's more open to the exploration end of it. Now, that's not to say that there isn't cases where it's the opposite way around, but in general, on a balancing scale, women seem to be more open to the exploration of the emotions around what's come up, and as opposed to men. But then, is that part of our conditioning as women, that we were allowed, or our condition for men, their condition as men, that they weren't allowed the opportunity to show their feelings as much when they were kids, or they weren't, you could dive into that, and there's so much goes on. But in the mediation room in general, the women are more open to exploration and the emotions end of it, where sometimes the male counterparts can feel a bit uncomfortable with kind of going into those areas. Now, having said that, I find once you've created the space where so maybe the first, joint session, that might be uncomfortable, but once you kind of get into it and they get used to, I suppose used to is the wrong thing, when they've gained that trust in you and they can see that by doing this exploration, they can actually get somewhere. So I think for men, when they see the point of it, if for want of a better way, so when they see that this exploration will lead them to somewhere forward, then they go, oh, okay, so I'm okay with doing this now because I know this is going to move me forward. Where women are happy with the exploration without necessarily knowing where it's going to lead to. But men are more open to once they know it's getting them to where they need to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, please connect this to the prehistoric brain also. Connect it to that the man, once he knows which path he's following, is willing to go on it.
I think something. Because
I'm just trying. I'm not saying it. I'm just.
We could easily attach that to prehistoric, because prehistorically the man would have been leading the tribe. He would have had to know that it was safe. The tribe was going to follow him, so he had to know that environment was safe. He had to make those decisions quickly, and he hadn't got the time for reflection. Where, if we were to look back on that would have been different then for the woman. So is that where it links back to the prehistoric brain? I don't know.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. I mean, yeah,
there's so much. There's so much. The neuroscience of this absolutely fascinates me,
So,
Vikram.
what you're saying is, in all these years, the human brain hasn't evolved the way it should have. That's all we're saying, and we are not finding ways to be able to get it out of that, or we don't want to get it out of it, or it should not get out of it.
Oh, no, no.
Also,
I think we are finding ways, Vikram. I do think our default is our prehistoric brain, because that's survival. Do you know, that's as a race. When you break us down to a race, or anything like that, that's survival. But I do think we are changing, and I think that change is coming from a self-awareness and a reflective practice. And it's fascinating if you go through, because I've looked a lot around adolescence and the brain and everything else. And when you get an adolescent to reflect and get involved in reflective practice, it speeds up the formation of the connections between different parts of the brain. Now, look, I'm telling you from a very non-scientific, general overview. But so if that does that for the adolescent brain, and our brain it can change and has the ability to change. And I really do, when I look at, say, my sister-in-law, and I see how her brain has reprogrammed itself over a couple of years so that she can deal with kind of, all the various different areas of brain damage, and has formed new connections. Well, then I do think we can reprogram our brains to a certain extent. I do think our prehistoric brain will always be there as something to protect us as a race. But I also think by self-reflection and self-awareness and naming and kind of taming our emotions, that we can understand why we have the fears and, say, the biases we have. Because when we realize they no longer serve us, that's where the rational thinking has to come in, that some of those things no longer serve us, that they served us when we were out hunting and gathering and wherever else. And when we actually reflect enough and understand that actually those things no longer serve us, well, then I do think it will change the way our brain, because our brain wants to be, it wants to be, what's the word I'm looking for? It wants to be efficient. It wants to work at the best capacity that it can work at. But it needs our help. And I think our help is about kind of reflection and understanding.
I think maybe to accept it the way it is. That's not, we don't, maybe, because maybe that's the way it should be. Maybe that's survival, like you said, survival. Maybe certain aspects of survival don't change. To be able to accept that and then create that atmosphere where that thing is taken as something which is there and has to be dealt with, and that comfort zone and that safe zone has to be created in that way. So you see a difference in the way men and women approach the mediation and way they go about the process. So there is some difference that you see there.
Yeah, there is definitely a difference. Yeah, there is a difference in the room. Yeah, there definitely is. But I think as mediators, again, when we understand that difference, when we understand why that difference is there, well, then we can not adjust our process, because the process is important, but we can take into account in our mediation that that might be there, and it might be there for one, it might be there for one person, might be there for another person. And look, Vikram, I'm going back to the original thing. People are people. People are people first.
That's important. That's the important part, Andrea. That is what we don't have to lose sight of. That these are people, and there is, whatever the physical structure that you see, but to reach inside that, once you can reach inside that, doesn't matter. You can take away all these other aspects, all the layers, even that prehistoric brain layer that is creating whatever responses. You can go beyond that, and there is that person sitting inside. And if you can get there, I think then that whole gender aspect can be looked at. I think that. But then in terms of parties coming into mediation, I don't know how, if in your work, have you seen that there are certain in a situation where women should have been there but are not there? But which would rather be in, of course, in the family matters that you do, of course, those women have to be part of it. But in the community, this is more in the community mediation situation. that are they not brought in as parties? Because this discussion is the larger discussion globally. So obviously things would be different, say in a small village in Africa or India, as compared to maybe other parts. So I think that's a larger global discussion. But in your
Yeah.
what your experience on that has been, if there is something.
I think actually in Ireland, women are very much involved in the community. So they're very much involved in on a community level, changing, pushing for change, maybe in policies or the way things are done. And so I would say that they probably have a very good representation on a community level. And I actually think they're very much a driving force behind a lot of community things and community projects, and and community dialogue. So I would say that's what I would say, that they are. And is that because they're very much part of family? Is that because the community is part of the family, is part of the community? Is that where that connection is? Don't know. So
But in terms of, say, in a community mediation setup, in terms of decision making, I mean, actual decision making in that process, is there some kind of a differentiation or discrimination there? Do you ever see that there?
I haven't. That's not to say there isn't.
But now, I mean, differentiation in terms of the place that you stay, say in the smaller parts of the country where there's less population, say villages and all that, compared to the cities. Is there a difference there? Have you seen any difference in those?
But no, because I wouldn't have that experience, Vikram. So I wouldn't have, the small. You see, women are very much, a driving force in Irish communities, and I mean, you can see that if you read. Now, I don't like reading, but if you look at any of the history, say, of any the troubles in Northern Ireland, and that's what they were referred to. Only in Ireland could you refer to it as troubles, like, but when you look at the troubles, say that in Northern Ireland, it was the women. Like, the women were such a strong force in bringing peace to Northern Ireland, and at a community level, and really they did they get the same recognition that they should have got? Probably not, but so there's a real sense of, I feel anyway, a real sense of women in Irish community, be it small communities, the small rural communities, or the larger cities, or anything like that. Women are very much driving force. But then you see the largest population of, say, in schools, within the school system, the majority of teachers would be women. So there is which was probably the same in most cultures. I'm not sure. What about in India? Would women be the main teachers? Yeah.
Large numbers, yeah.
Yes, so there's a lot of that. They're involved in the schools, they're involved in the ground roots, they're involved in things. So on a community level, women would be the driving force, and there would be fairly, serious decision makers that would be female in that.
But moving away a little bit from the topic, little bit on that, because the school teacher thing is important. I want to tap into this aspect for promoting mediation, to make them the peacemakers in the community. Because I think they have a very important role to play, even in places where in otherwise in society, maybe women may be not looked at in terms of the equality aspect of it, might be an issue there. But I think when it comes to school teachers, I think their things can be a little easier for them to get into the community and be able to explain things, and that respect and everything. So I want to tap into that. So even in Ireland or wherever. So okay, back to what you were saying. I wanted to bring that out because it was the school teacher thing was important.
I have to go. Vikram, I have to go in a few minutes. So just to.
So whenever you want to conclude, start concluding, give your concluding remarks at any stage. You can do that. And I don't know how much time you want to take to conclude.
I have to leave. I have to leave at 3:30, if that's okay. So it's 19 minutes past now. So
okay, so whatever, I mean, what you were saying something, but the important thing is that if women are the driving force, has that affected the way maybe settlements are done within communities, how communities live with each other in terms of the harmony within communities? Does that, you think that a difference there because women are the driving force and in mediations there?
Yeah, I think. Now, see, if I started, there's always the fear that you like, because you recognize as well that there's some great men in those community groups as well. So I'm so conscious of that them and us. I hate going down that road. I suppose for women, it seems to, it's that sense of connection. It's about building connection. They want the best for their sons, their daughters. They want the society because they see the future generations. They see that, and a bit like, in environmental issues, it's so important to have women speaking about that, because it is, I suppose, again, we're going back to this prehistoric brain, this thing to procreate and for survival and to have that sense of a world that we can survive in, and that sense of maintaining some sort of community, society and world for our children. So, there's plenty of men feel the same way. So that's why I'm very favorable as a woman, for me, right? So I'll say it from my point of view. So for a woman as me, within the community and working for the community, I want to make sure that I leave a world in a better place, so that my children, my grandchildren, the generations that come after me have that same sense of it. So in that regard, as a woman, I would think that we do have that sense of making a difference in our community, of wanting to leave it better, of wanting to do that. Is there men that feel that way as well? Of course there is, so that's the thing. But is it that, women, because say in some regard it's a displacement between men and women and where they are in society, and maybe that some of them are, some of the best community workers are actually women that's, this is the phrase that, women that stay at home, or women that are homemakers. They're more making homes, they're forming society, they're forming communities. They've such an intelligence about them in so many ways. And you don't want to push the women out of those communities and those roles, because they're probably what makes some of the biggest difference for society. So there is a danger of saying that, that role is not good enough. Again, Vikram, going back to my same point, it's about that having the same weight, the same respect as somebody that's in a professional thing, so that there's an equal respect given to both roles. And it's okay to choose one role over the other, and it doesn't mean that anyone is less important for society. If anything, being part of that ground roots and forming a society that's a better place for our children is probably one of the most worthwhile things you could do in life.
But from that prehistoric, first of all, one of the topics for discussion with my Mediation Vision 2026 is going to be the prehistoric brain. That's come up a little too much here. But in terms of the solutions coming up in a mediation safe, in a community setup, for what you're saying is that maybe when women are the driving force, are they looking at more long-term solutions and looking at things from that perspective because of the survival aspect of it? It's a discussion point. I mean, you've just picked up something, and we can then develop on it as we go along. So these are the things that need to be brought out as just discussion points. I'm not, like you said, we're not solving the world's problems sitting here, or we're not coming out with some conclusions. These are just discussions that we're having. So that's an important one that needs to be had.
Yeah. I think it's areas really that we can kind of research, because sometimes the world is so busy that these are things that we actually don't look into. We just take them as that's the way they are, or that's the given, and and maybe that's something that we need to research and we need to talk. I mean, somebody could look back at this discussion I had with you, Vikram, and say, no, God, no, she's completely coming from the wrong direction. That's not what thing. And you know what? Great, because that's what we need. We need people to have different opinions. We need people to be able to talk. We need people to be able to share their ideas, because with that comes the understanding. And with that, we move away from difference. With that, we embrace difference. And with that, then I suppose that divide between men and women and gender becomes less and less, because we're seen again as the person with the qualification, with the experience, with the competency to do whatever we want to do. But, some of that as well comes from, rewiring our brains and how it thinks, rewiring our biases and understanding them. And even our own internal biases that we have against ourselves. But there's, I've spoken to many women who come into mediation and actually don't think that their experience that they've had in life is good enough, because it's undervalued, and then they begin to undervalue that experience. So it's about bringing up the value.
Yeah, I think, and what you've been repeating about the person, it's about the person. So I think first is to be able to understand and get to know the person beyond all the other aspects of gender or anything else. So that I think is the key. Is the key actually.
Yeah, it is the key.
Yeah. So now, as I can see that there is not too much time that you have. So just a broad conclusion kind of thing. There is no conclusion, but the discussion conclusion. Because there was some comment which someone had put down about that difference aspect of it. Women can understand better than men because a woman is the person who takes care of family and office. She understands it, can handle better, more patience she has. So there is some things in people's mind in terms of the difference between men and women in these aspects of it. So again, is it a cultural thing? What is it? Should there be such differences, Kevin? Because when you make a blanket statement like that and you say more patience she has, so okay, so if someone makes is it too sweeping a statement?
Yeah, I think that's when we go into stereotyping, when we start saying, and that's not a bad thing, because that's what we do, and we do have similarities, but it's about embracing the difference as opposed to similarities. The similarities are there, and they're great, and they are our role has been to nurture, to provide home, to rear our children, to be the more gentle, be the more thing. But that's not to say that's not there in a man either, and that's not to say that women don't have the more masculine aspect. I think it's about bringing our experience. It's about that value of experience. So that value of child rearing, patience, running a family home, that experience, that expertise has to be valued and has to be respected at the same level as somebody who's run up, say, within the corporate environment. And they bring within those two environments, you're both navigating humanity. You're both navigating different people. You're both navigating. So the experience is just as important and should be respected as just as much, and should be valued. So I suppose if I was to finish up with anything, is that we need to be careful not to stereotype, and that, and not change the conversation into them and us. I think the conversation has to be a dialogue, and not just between women, but between women and men. And it's through that open conversation that we will build up a respect about our experience and understanding, and how we can complement each other as opposed to compete with each other, and maybe to remove some of the fear. And I think there's always fear in diversity and difference. And it's when we acknowledge the fear and realize that when we understand it, it's actually probably not as scary as it seems. And I suppose on a professional level then, Vikram, women, maybe there does have to be policy changes from the top down to allow spaces for women to come into. But there also has to be changes from the bottom up. So I think it has to go in two directions. And I think we have to be careful that we don't end up with a negative kind of, I suppose that it's not that we're not being put in positions because of our gender either. So it's not a negative reaction to gender imbalance, it becomes from a place of you're there because of the person you are, the experience you have, and the worth and value that you bring to the table. But what we have to do is open the door, because I think that's where the problem is, that sometimes the door is not open to allow women to put themselves forward. And if we open the door and then decide based on values, respect, experience and everything else of who is the best person for the job. But again, it's about changing. It's a society question. It's about changing families. It's about changing communities. It's about changing school systems. It's about changing everything. And each of us can start with one little step And that's identifying maybe one bias that we have against the other gender, and maybe questioning that bias and where that bias comes from. And is that bias real? And so I think we all kind of took one bias about the other gender to look at. Maybe we might start shifting a little bit towards the conversation.
Absolutely. Oh, good thoughts. And obviously always nice talking to you. So this is another one of those conversations. But the important things that you brought out, of course, which is important, is get to know the person, communicate, understand them, because there is much more inside than what you can see. And then that discrimination, that differentiation, you will also maybe realize that it's not there. It doesn't need to be there. So all those discussions we will have, lots of more discussions we will have. So thank you very much, Andrea.
Thank
And
you.
let me
Vikram,
just
a
cut the
pleasure as always.
no,